I will be talking about the trying to conceptualize agency while looking at my case study that I look at. But I would like to start with quotation from a young girl that we just interviewed, where we just finished a study in Jerusalem, and I think that I'll try to first of all share with you the context and move into three issues that I'm planning to talk about. Number one is the issue of the politics of fear, then going into theorizing agency, then going into the dark side of agency, and very, very similar to where Urvashi was taking us in her analysis and sharing. But I'm referring to the reaction of a child that was taking the games and his dolls to school. And the question was, why is he taking it to school with him? And his reaction was that he's afraid if he will come back, the house will be demolished, so then he won't have his own games with him. So he is taking all his games every day with him to school. In addition, if I'm quoting a young woman saying, we see the settlers, and this is the old city of Jerusalem, we see the settlers walking in the streets with their rifles. Their kids are safe. They could fix any problem with them, with the water or electricity, or call an ambulance when needed. They could do all they want while we look at them with hasra, deep agony. I have 2 rooms and we are 7 people. Last week they came without previous notice, demolished one of the rooms, and now we must pay the previous fines, which is $12,000, and the fees for the bulldozer that demolished the house, which is $23,000. The lawyer we need to pay, and we have a tick in the police station. A tick means that if someone will go look for a job, and the police has a tick, a sign that this guy or this woman could never find a job because they are Palestinians, a record, but they call it, women that I interviewed call them the tick. Another woman say, I work in Jewish houses, I clean their villas. Do you understand me? I work in the new settlements in Jerusalem, but I do not declare that I work. So when I broke my shoulder 3 years ago, while cleaning the windows in one of the Jewish houses, I did not have work insurance and we were starving. Another one. I wanted to study medicine, but do not have the money to fund the daily transportations to the university, checkpoints, yeah? So I changed my major, and now I study Arabic, to become a teacher, and I hate it. God knows whether I will find a job. Now, these stories takes us into looking at agency, people's agency, women's agency in conflict zones through analyzing the way women engage with it. So I will, when looking at what I said, the political economy of fear, I look at the way, the way we as Palestinians and Palestinians are produced in this political economy of fear into people that should be feared, into the feared others, even before the state of Israel was initiated. I look at it as those that came from Europe with their Orientalist approaches towards us, though they looked at the Orient from one point of view as those others that should be feared and that should be looked at them in a different way, adding to the settler colonialism when the colonizers claim to fear the colonized, which Mami talks about, and others, and then Zionism that came with the slogan, and different slogans. One example is a land with no people for people with no land. So when the people were found on their land, they were turned into the feared other. This political economy was supported by, of course, the global physics of power, a geography of fear. It's shocking, the shock doctrine that Naomi Klein's talk about, that was reflected in the history of suffering of the spatially, socially, and psychologically ghettoized, but also nullified, which means that the Palestinian not only was ghettoized, but was not found to be visible, or to turning Palestinians into the homo sacer, into people that live in this state of exception that has no right to right. Now, how can individuals and communities that suffered a long history of displacement and face such industry of violence, such industry of fear, such industry of otherization, of nullification, of asking people to demolish their own houses in order for them to survive, asking people to pay the money for the bulldozer that demolished the house. How could women work and cope and survive under such conditions? I look at my research on the militarization of education, my research on housing demolitions, my research on how, where, when to give birth, because again, looking at the data of the Palestinian Authority lately, and that really bothers me a lot, the data shows that there are less births on the checkpoints. So, really, it seems that the checkpoints became better, and the people at the checkpoints are much better. They're allowing women to reach the hospital. They did not look at the data that shows how many cesarean operations are done, because women are so afraid to reach the checkpoint. And this is why they're being either anyway, so the question is, how do we read? So the question is when to give birth, how to bury the people that you like, how to carry them, how to hide the dead bodies, when to show it, how to deal with it, and how to bury your beloved ones in a dignified manner. And in Jerusalem, the story is very strong. So the survival, the daily survival, all points out to individual agency. And this individual agency should really be taken into consideration. But at the same time, agency, while facing a sense of orchestrated trap and entrapment, the masyadi, we always hear it in the discussions with people, the feeling of being suffocated, a sense of persecution. So in the old city where I live, settlers are living between us. And nobody talks about settlers in the old city of Jerusalem. Usually they talk about, oh, it's a settlement around there. No, they're between. They're in the small rooms between my neighbor and me in the middle, and are living between us. They have cameras. They are watching us all the time. They walk in our streets to destabilize the sense of security, turning the home front, the neighbor front, into a conflict front, but constantly. So how one can analyze agency under such sophisticated technology of domination, when every single act of the daily life, reaching to school, reaching the kindergarten, going out of your house, being able to function, is always there. So I look at the, and it's not only Jerusalem and the West Bank. I want also to take you to the Bedouin women in the Naqab, where surveillance, territorial control is there all the time. I want to take you into Nazareth. In Nazareth, there was a village called Safuri. Today, people are living in Safafri, 61 years after the displacement of the people in Safuri. Very high rate of poverty, very high rate of illiteracy, and you look at its effect and the inability of people to breathe after so many years. While if I will only look at Safafri, at Safuri in 1946, there was a girls' school in 1946. So if it's a cultural issue, I don't understand what culture is. So the militarized settler colonialism that is reflected in the day-to-day act, in spatial politics, in geopolitics, in housing demolitions, in putting cameras, it's causing so many things. It's disciplining the occupied, it's scaring the occupied, it's violating the right in a legalized manner. Again, colonialism was done legally, turning such violations into a routine that secures the colonizers from the colonized, because it's the security of the settlers, of the Israeli Jews, versus those that have no right to right. Turns Palestinians into suspects all the time, in all spaces, in all conditions, while going to school, while reaching hospitals, and so on. So this physically and psychologically situating Palestinians in a prison controlled by Israel, and controlled by a global panoptical controllers that are playing all the time into the day-to-day life of the Palestinians. Here, Palestinian women, with nothing left, because every single step is controlled. It's under the camera, the surveillance. With their house, with the rubbles of the houses, with the preservation of the lost home keys that we were talking about yesterday, with the preservation of the kushan, which is a proof that the house belonged to them in the past, with so many other ways have developed and are constantly developing innovative means of coping, including, the coping that are affected by, this policy of, let's fuck the system. Let's see how we could show them that we could do different. So we won't tell them this, we won't tell them this, we won't tell them this. That backfires in so many kinds. So this kind that created a culture of resistance and agency that cannot be denied a voice. And this is where sometimes calling it violent agency calls lots of questions, at least ethical questions and traumatological questions, let alone legal questions, because the right to resistance is a right according to international law and according to so many other ways. So the creation of this culture of resistance that goes back to creating hidden transcripts in coping with the hardship. And here, a key insight that I look at in Achille Mbembe's writing has offered us is that in societies in which everyday life is characterized by the everydayness of physical violence, the everydayness of militarized conflict, the everydayness of somatic brutality in the name of collective identities, we can no longer imagine a simple opposition, between nature and war on the one hand and social life, peace on the other hand. So let's talk, let's implement 1325, let's put women on the negotiating table, because peace is prostituted as space is prostituted. Mbembe here invites us to imagine a more terrifying landscape, and I am inviting you also to look at women's agency under such in such analysis, is to look at this terrifying space in which order, i.e. regularity, predictability, routine, everydayness itself, is organized around the fact or the prospect of violence, whether it's visible violence, hidden violence, clear violence, but it's violence. In Hebron, as in Jerusalem, and many other places and spaces, on checkpoints, in Israeli hospitals and more, people created modes of facing the traumatic uncertainties and fears. I could only tell you that last April, I was not feeling well and I had chest pains. And I called my doctor to share with him the fact that I don't know what to do with my chest pain and inability to breathe. And he said, well, why don't you follow me to the hospital, Hadassah Hospital. He works there. He's a Palestinian from Nazareth. And I refused to go. I told him, if I will go to the hospital, I'll end up with a heart attack. Now I have a problem. Meet me at the French hospital, whereby there are not enough equipments for a person like me with my medical problems. But the hardship of, on that day, there were so many things going on with the news and the TVs going there, being under their eyes and their surveillance and their reactions and their faces and the mimics of their faces would have caused me other problems. Now, think about a woman that is having a baby in Hadassah Hospital because she has no access to other places or she needs money. Think about a person who needs to go into surgery. Think about a kid that needs to go to school, to apply for a visa. This is the everydayness. And here, agency should be really given a very serious thought. Women that their houses were about to be demolished, I call it al-hadm qabl al-hadm, the demolition before the demolition, because this fear, so you need to sleep with your clothes on and not in anything else, because they might come at early morning and demolish the houses. They come with dogs and with over 100 or 200 or 300 soldiers. It's extremely scary. Such women like Siham, that decided to have a garden maybe in the size of this table. Maybe when they come with their bulldozers, they will see the garden and they won't demolish the house. You understand? If this is not agency, I don't know what is this. So the creation of a small garden in the midst of rubble, passing through 4 checkpoints to reach school and educational institution, drawing on the walls. We have between the wall between Jerusalem and Ramallah, there's this beautiful thing. It's a Control-Alt-Delete. Like Control-Alt-Delete, like, what is it in the computer? It's beautiful. To voice out resistance, hiding your beloved ones or their bodies under the chairs in cabs in order to pass their bodies and to be able to bury them. Putting in the newspaper, we have this habit of انتقل إلى رحمته تعالى. We write that so-and-so have died on so-and-so day, and we put the picture. That was my father-in-law, late father-in-law. Hope that I will put a picture of him when he was 20 years old, when he died at the age of 75. But putting their pictures, and then when you write تقبل التعازي, condolences are accepted, and it's not written the address. Mm-hmm. The address is not written because you need to protect the people that are mourning. This is like those small day-to-day things that are very strong. Leaving male children's hair long. This is one of the cases that I was in the old city, that she was fearing that the settlers will always come and harass the boys, the males. So she kept the hair of her male boys very long all the time, so as to tell them that they're girls, so don't come close to them. And much more are part of an emerging repertoire of efforts to produce previously unreckoned level of uncertainty about the social identity, the value, the survival, and the dignity. Now here, agency under such conditions is aligned to other spheres about growing oppression, inequality, loss of control, threat to local security and livelihood. And here I have lots of questions that I constantly think of, but such agency leave us with so many really questions. Who are we responsible to when we're acknowledging such agencies? As a therapist, I say it. Is it agency? Should I support it? When theorizing agency, and as a theoretician, could we really produce and talk about counter-knowledge to the existing knowledge? I could tell you an example whereby a couple of psychologists that came, and they were looking at kids in a place where 22 houses were demolished, one shot. And the psychologist was talking to Marwan, who's a young kid, 10 years old. And Marwan was showing him around. That was my house, this is the leg of a table, that was my bed, this is my bedroom. And then the psychologist looked at me and he said, Nadera, the kids are amazing, they're not traumatized, And I looked at him. So his cookbook told him that this Marwan was not traumatized. Again, the DSM-4 with how many times and bedwetting and so on. He looked to him like not a traumatized kid. And I decided to leave the group because, like here, sometimes this Western therapeutic way of analyzing things is very upsetting to a person like me. And then this Marwan picked up his, and I felt lost for words. In such situations, you look at those kids with the agency, with the power, with the ability to create something from the nothing left, to show, here I have power, even if it's rebels, it's my house. Let me show you. This is my physics test, last physics test, look at it. And then I was like a stupid therapist standing there, and I didn't know what to tell him. So I said, Marwan, what do you want to be when you'll be older? He did pulling out rubble from his hands, and he said, see all those houses? I'm going to be an engineer, and I'm going to build those houses. This is the kind of power that you build on and take it to move on. And this is the kind of power that sometimes we try to look at. But the question remains, what are we looking at when we're looking at such agencies? Are we looking at the short term, the now? Are we looking at the long term? Are we looking at the, what is the educational message to our kids? To lie, white lie to survive? Would that normalize chaos? Would that cause other problem? Is there a better way off? What about the dark side of agency? As you were talking about, Urvashi, and are we really dancing with denial? Agency might seem to me schizophrenic. Some other times it seems very empowering, and one other time it seems very causing trauma, really, confusing, but suitable for individuals in times, in contexts filled with horror, with uncertainty, and with fear. Now, if I try to conclude, I see that the global and local politics surrounding military occupation, and I'm looking at the Palestinian case study, and whether it's in 48, even for 1920, break down the division between the civilian and the military space, and the home, and the bed, and school are becoming a really war front. So militarism in Palestine presumes a world where civilians do not exist, and this is what is going on. Militarization, therefore, is not just a total war against Palestinians, as I see it in our case, as it is a war waged by the powerful at different points in history, in time, and in times of the day, of the individual life, of our walk, journey, and so on. It's a war as an everyday possibility, like every single act, and you don't know when it's gonna hit you. It's waged precisely to destabilize the idea of the everydayness. And it adds unpredictability, a key to produce constant fear, terror, trauma, anxiety, inability to plan. Such war blurs the bounds between space, time. It works to disguise its own principles of organization and mobilization. Such context creates not only bodily trauma. I could tell you again, my study on housing demolitions have showed that young girls are more having child diabetes more than when boys are coping, it seems, in different ways. So there are some power and agency, but the connection between victimization and agency is always there. It's not either or, it's always together. And it always should be looked at in both ways and not according to the cookbooks of the DSM-4 or revised. Such context created bodily trauma, spatial promiscuity, and the dramas of the self-sacrifice. It's this constant effort to replace peace with violence as the guarantee anchor of everyday life. And this is where it uses this emergency as its routine, and when emergency is a routine, and I don't need to tell you that legally in Israel the emergency is the routine. According to the law, the emergency laws are still ample. Values exceptional forms of violence and violations of its norm as part of the legal repertoire of controlling the day-to-day life of the Palestinians. So the day-to-day attack with its emergency rules is many things, including an epistemological assault on all of us in thinking about agency. It's an epistemological assault because it destabilizes our most cherished assumptions that peace is neutral markers of social order, and that nation-state is natural guarantor and container of this order. So such agency, the agency discussed above, whether it's by women's reactions, children's reactions, men's reactions, in the ability to face the day-to-day thing, is an agency that was born out of this nightmarish situation, and which requires that we really look more closely at the logic of this nightmare. Thank you.